Hello and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Visscher. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Phil represents the 132nd Assembly District, which consists of a majority of Steuben County, all of Schuyler and Yates counties, and portions of Chemung County. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're sitting down with the Assemblyman since the 2015-16 budget was passed, and we're going to get some of his thoughts on that towards the end of the show. But first, the Assemblyman had an opportunity to attend a press conference earlier this week having to do with extending parole hearings for violent felons. Always nice to see you, Assemblyman.
Good to be with you.
Talk to us about that press conference yesterday. I know this is a issue that's has quickly become close to your heart, and there's legislation to extend the time that violent felons can come up for parole hearings. Talk to us about that.
Correct. In my district, I've become pretty close with Dale and Dory Roby, whose young son Derek, in 1993, at 4 years old, was brutally murdered by Eric Smith, who was 13 at the time. A story that got national headlines and attention. Obviously, that was something that the Robys will never forget, but it's something they have to relive over and over again every 2 years, because the current law in New York State says that you can only the maximum time between parole hearings for anyone can be 24 months. What we're doing with the legislation, and when we reached out, the Robys reached out to us a couple of years ago, and we started talking about this legislation. It's been around for a while. They came up last year, and we had a press conference near the end of session just to kind of start building some momentum for it. It didn't happen in the Assembly last year, but what we're asking to do is to extend that time period, give the discretion to the parole board based on a case-by-case basis to extend that up to 60 months for violent felons. But we've narrowed the bill considerably from last year, because there was a whole range of offenses that could qualify for that. We narrowed it to 4 specific crimes: murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, predatory sexual assault, and predatory sexual assault against a child. Those 4 Class A felonies. Specifically, this is what this legislation would do, and give the parole board, again, the discretion on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't mean automatically it's 60 months. There's some confusion about that, so we're trying to address that concern. It could be up to 60 months on a case-by-case basis. But for a family like the Robys, and this picture you'll see in the press conference is a picture that Mr. and Mrs. Roby held in their hands during the press conference. And when they left today, because we had some meetings with people from the governor's office and some legislators, Mr. and Mrs. Roby asked me if I'd hang on to this picture for the next 6 weeks. And I said yes, because it will be a reminder that we have a lot of work to do to get things done for the Roby family, but also for other families who have lost loved ones from horrific crimes. And I think when you try to get people to think about this issue, I think the Roby family probably says a little bit good for themselves. If you want to let them hear from them first, and we can kind of talk a little bit more about it. But.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to point out that Derek Roby's parents were in attendance at that press conference this week, and it became quite emotional for Derek's father, particularly, to discuss this topic and issue. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and we'll come back and discuss in further detail with Assemblyman Phil Palmesano.
It's certainly a privilege and honor for me, on behalf of myself and Senator Tom O'Meara, to introduce 2 of our constituents, Dale and Dory Roby. If you're not familiar with their story, their 4-year-old son, Derek, was murdered by 13-year-old Eric Smith back in 1993 and got national attention and headlines. And I just can't thank you guys enough for coming up to share your personal story and communicating how important this issue is. So, Dale and Dory, please come forward and share your story.
The loss of a child is the ultimate parent's nightmare. We're here today because we represent many families within the state that go through the same thing every other year. I know for us, we start a letter campaign months before we're scheduled to meet with the parole commissioner. The week of the parole hearing is painful. Trying to wrap your head around the idea that the killer may be set free. What would we do?
It has been 23 years since we lost Derek. He was brutally murdered And this was our 8th parole hearing this past April. For me, it was even more emotional than the first 7. It just isn't fair for families to feel that a murderer has an option to walk every 2 years when we walk the rest of our lives without him.
Obviously, a tough time for Derek's parents to discuss this, and you certainly, each time that Derek's parents have to come up for a hearing, they have to essentially relive what happened to their son, who was 4 at the time.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Roby family who joined us for this press conference. We had 2 other families who lost their loved ones. Fred Theo is the main sponsor of this bill, and the Hennessy family came from their daughter that was brutally murdered. And we also had Janice Geddes, Grace Shepard Geddes, who was an advocate on behalf of Jenna's Law, whose daughter was murdered. Yes, I mean, the fact of the matter is, and it's not every 2 years because, like I said, Mrs. Roby mentioned that they just finished their 8th parole hearing in April. And now they're set to come back up again in 2 years in April of 2018. But it's not just every 2 years. It's not like they prepare for this a week before. Around November, every other November, so every Thanksgiving and Christmas season, they're starting to get the letter, and then they have to start preparing the letters and the videos and getting all the information out and preparing for this. And it's grueling. No family should have to relive this horrible tragedy every 24 months or every 18 months. And I think this law that we're looking to change for these families it's never going to bring back their loved one. It's never going to replace the hole in their heart for the loved one they lost. But at the very least, it can give them a little bit of a respite, knowing that they don't have to go back through this next hearing, in 18 months and start preparing for it. If that decision is determined by the parole board again, which is at their discretion based on the crime, based on the activities that are going on in prison. That's all going to be considered by them. But if that determination can be made up to 60 months, that's going to bring a little bit of relief to those family members. And I think, given the fact that we've narrowed the scope of this bill to murder in the 1st degree, murder in the 2nd degree, so someone who's lost their life, or predatory sexual assault against a child.
So these are very violent acts.
These are very, very violent felony acts. And I guess Janice Geddes made a really good point when she said, when people, there's people in our house who kind of put some opposition. Even one of the sentencing groups came out and said, this is not, not a good legislation. We need to have them come up as much as possible. I think very uninformed. And I guess what I would say to that person, which we're going to hope to meet, think of the person you love the most. Now think of losing that person. Now think of losing that person in the most horrific, horrible way possible that their life ended. And then think about you as a family member having to relive that over and over again every 18 months. And even for the sexual assault, think of a young child who's sexually brutally assaulted, doesn't die, but then has to go through this parole hearing every 18 months to relive that tragedy, that impact that's going to scar and affect them the rest of their life.
Oh, psychologically.
Psychologically, emotionally, mentally, in every way. And the other thing that these families brought up, especially for those who lost a loved one, some of these family members are getting older. And, as they get older, or, God forbid, pass away, that responsibility is going to fall onto the other siblings who are going to have to carry on that charge with the parole hearings. And that's difficult. And to think of them doing that every 18 months, that's a burden that no one wants to carry. And I guess we're going to make a very strong push towards the end of the session. We've got more co-sponsors on the bill. We're going to talk to more people. We had a meeting with the governor's office and corrections. We're going to continue to talk to people at the legislative side of things. But we're going to say, think about this. Think about if this was your family member. I think it's a very reasonable and common sense legislation that would allow this little bit of time. And again, we want to be clear. This is not mandating 60 months for every hearing. That's the maximum. But it could be 12 months. It could be a minimum of 6 months. It could be 2 years. Whatever they decide is appropriate based on that time. But to say the maximum it could be is only 2 years. For these very heinous crimes, for people who hopefully won't get out of prison, or at least there's that option to bring a little bit of respite, a little bit of peace, of calmness to these families' lives. Because, and my colleague Fred Thiel said it also. He goes, I feel bad having to come up here and do this press conference. They want to help. They want to help for other families to change this for other families. And to have them come up here and have to do this year after year is another tragedy. But they want to help. They want to fight. And so when Mr. Roby gave me this picture before he left today, he asked if I would keep it, because I had a button with a picture on my jacket, and I have it on my computer to remind me about the issue. But I'm going to keep this out, and I'm going to see, when I'm in my office up here, I'm going to see Derek's face, and it's going to remind me to just keep pushing and talking to whoever we can talk to listen. From my perspective, this is probably one of the top priorities. We need to get through to the Assembly, who has always been pretty resistant to changes. It seems a lot of times, unfortunately, more concerned about the person in prison than the families and the victims that the crimes were committed against. And I think when they look at this legislation, when they really look at the law, what we're trying to do, and this is a victims' rights, family victims rights bill. I think it's common sense legislation. We've heard from more families. I think hopefully we can build more support from this. The Roby started a petition online.
Do you know the address?
It's through change.org, but if people contact I know they're going to be renewing that petition when they go home. But if you look up Derek Roby petition on change.org, Parole, I think that would
I'm
pop
sure
up.
It'll come up, yeah.
They have 1,800 signatures. We presented those signatures to some people today. But we need to get this message out.
Call the governor's office.
Call the governor's office. Call the speaker's office. Let the speaker know. Let Danny O'Donnell, the chairman of corrections, know. We need this bill to come out for a vote.
Certainly the Senate as well.
The Senate's passed it. The Senate has passed it last year. The Senate's moving out of committee this week, and we expect the Senate to pass it soon, which will hopefully build momentum again for our House. But this is the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do for Derek's family, for Derek. For the families that came up here and traveled, and for the countless other families that have lost loved ones through horrific crimes that are going to have to go through these parole hearings. No family should have to relive a horrible tragedy every 2 years. And from my perspective, if we can't change this law, then I think New York's doing a real disservice and committing another crime against these families by not providing them the assistance and relief that they really are entitled to, need, and deserve. So we're going to keep pushing as the session goes.
With under 2 minutes left of the show, I mean, is this not really the essence of why you're elected when you come to Albany, is to protect New Yorkers?
It is, and that's why we're going to keep talking to every one of our colleagues who don't understand. I talked with a colleague of mine from the Senate, Democrats, who voted against this bill last year, and they want to try to work together. I go, well, look at this bill. I go, you voted against it. We modified it. I go, you can help us get this bill through. I'm going to talk to everyone I can. I know Fred Theo's going to talk to. We've talked to a number of our colleagues. We're going to make this push because it's the right thing to do. And I'll tell you, I've been through a lot of press conferences in my almost 6 years up here. And this press conference with the Roby family and these other families this year and last year are the ones that are going to stick with me. And
it's those heartfelt, personal stories of tragedy that really stick with you.
God forbid that happens to any one of us. And I think my colleagues would think a lot, who are opposed to this, would think a lot differently about this if this is one of their loved ones. And I think that's when Janice Getty said, think about that situation, who you love the most, dying, and then dying in the most horrific way possible, and then having to relive that. We need to help these families, and I'm committed to do everything I can to fight. I know Senator O'Mara is, and we're going to keep pushing till the end of session to hopefully get this passed and then signed into law by the governor, because quite frankly, it's the right thing to do, and we owe this to these families who've lost loved ones through very horrific crimes.
Always a pleasure to see you. Unfortunately, we had to discuss such a somber topic.
But it's important.
But very important indeed. And if you'd like to reach out to Phil Palmesano for some additional information on this legislation, you can also Google Derek Roby online for that online petition drive. You can reach out to the Assemblyman at his district office. You can call him as well. Phone number there is 607-776-9691. You can also message the Assemblyman on Facebook. He's there, available there 24 hours a day. Thank you very much for joining us today for this edition of Assembly Calendar. Until next time, take care.